I'm going to show you how Entity Framework works with the JetEntityFrameworkProvider. To do that, I will develop some models and run it with the JetEntityFrameworkProvider. I will implement it in a console application. Let's create the application. We will also enable query tracking. That is an option of JetEntityFrameworkProvider. So we will be able to see SQL statements, but also DDL statements and DML statements. Okay, start. I need to add JetEntityFrameworkProvider to my application. Okay. I will add the connection string to appconfig. I'm copying paste it. Okay, but you can connect to the database in the way you prefer. And in this case, the connection, I called it the full connection to the JetEntityFrameworkProvider, and the connection string is an OnlyDB connection string. So you have also to create this database. So let's run access and create a new database. Okay. Okay, sorry, my Microsoft Access is in Italian. Okay, now we can start to create our model and our context. The first model that I'm going to implement, it's a very simple model with two entities and the one-to-one relationship. Let's create the first class, person. The person has an ID, prop. This will be an auto-numbering property, an auto-numbering primary key in the database for Entity Framework. And then a person has a name, and the person has a collection of owned cars. Collection car, not implemented yet. Owned cars. Okay, so we have to implement car, to write car. Car as an ID, we can have also string ID that will be, this property will be not an auto-numbering field but a primary key. So in this case we have to set max length to something, because in Microsoft Access we can't have an unlimited size primary key. We can also insert max length here, the name 50, but it's not really important. And a car, also a name, let's copy it from here. In this case we can leave it unlimited, and also we insert a navigation property, public person owner and set. Okay, so this is fine. If we want to enable lazy loading, we have to mark these properties as virtual. And also often I public person, I initialize the collections. So owned cars equal to new is car. So I can create a new person and just add cars without creating a new collection of cars. This is in C Sharp 5. Probably is not a good idea, but anyway, you can do what you prefer. And now the context. We can create. I can make one file per class I prefer. So move this here in a new file, and we can also add a new class with the context. By the way, I'm using ReSharper. That is a very good tool to write applications in C Sharp. Context. Okay, and then we create initializer context. Okay, base connection. So we open the connection that we used in the application config, so we can change the provider and the provider of entity framework in the way we like, so we can change it from JetEntityFrameworkProvider or access without changing the application. And we have a set of cars, so we have a set of cars, these cars, okay, and we have also a set of person, person will be people, okay, oh sorry, person, and we have to create the relationship between the two DB sets. So we override on model creating, and we have that person has many owned cars. The person has many owned cars, and the cars with an optional owner. Okay, we don't specify the name of the mapping field. We don't have the mapping field on the car class, and we should have it there. And I'd like to show you only the DDL, the content of the content of the data definition language. So I can write a very simple program where I just access the context, so Entity Framework will create the model for us. So text, create a new context, and then we can just context dot class dot account and access to the context, so it will create the table. We also insert here console.read, so we have a way to see what JetEntityFramework generates for us. And we also need to enable the SQL statement, so we can see the SQL statements. This is an option of JetEntityFrameworkProvider. Okay, let's start our app. Okay, how Entity Framework works, also with JetEntityFrameworkProvider. It's tries to see if in the database there is a migration history table. There is not, so he knows that he needs to create the first database. He creates cars with an owner ID for this is the field for the foreign key. Table for people. This is the cars. This is the table. This is the people table with an ID auto numbering and a name varchar 50. In this case, we have an ID varchar 10, not null, but it's varchar. And then we have an index for each foreign key properties, for foreign key property that Entity Framework creates for us. And we have also the constraint to the owner ID. And at the end, Entity Framework creates migration history. There is also a SQL statement that is the count that I insert. So this is the DDL generated by Entity Framework, by the JetEntityFrameworkProvider and the Entity Framework. Okay, I show you another very simple example. Let's open access, so I can remove. Here there is the table we have just created: migration history, cars, and people. We can also probably see relationships. Okay, this is some internal Microsoft Access table. We don't have to care about it, but we have the relationship that we expect. Okay. It's not important. Now we delete everything. Okay. So we have an empty database again. Now I add another relation to show you an M2N relationship. For example, a person can drive different cars. So and also a cars can be driven by different persons, by different people. So we can we are here in the person, so public we have a collection of DBs. Sorry, collection of car. This driven car, cars. And also in this case, we could create the new collection here. Cars, and has to be vehicle if you want to enable lazy loading. So drive it cars, and we have that a car can be driven by several people. So public collection person, we can call it drivers. Okay, person. Also in this case we can create public car drivers. Okay, this person. Okay. Now we have to configure this relationship that is an M2N relationship. We go to the in the context and we can say that also person. As many driven cars that has many drivers. Okay. So we did not write the junction table between cars and people. Entity Framework will create the junction table for us, and JetEntityFrameworkProvider will provide the right create table statement. And we can have a look to this table. Okay, the database is empty, so it's fine. Okay. Also, in this case, we have a check on migration history. It does not exist, so Entity Framework creates all the table for us. Not a migration, but it's a first-time migration. And we have the cars table with the owner ID. It's the relationship we had before, and people with no fields on it, because the owned cars, we can retrieve the owned cars using this field. Entity Framework can retrieve the owned cars using this field. And also there is another table, person cars, that Entity Framework create for us, that is a junction table. There is a person ID, there is a car ID, with a primary key constraint containing both the fields person ID and car ID. And look at the index. In this case, on person cars, we have two indexes. The index on person ID, that is a foreign key. We will see after that it is a foreign key. And on the car ID, the foreign key, this table, the junction table, has two foreign keys. And one from person cars to people using the ID, person ID, and one from person cars using car ID that references car ID. Just here there is an index that it's not useful, because we have a primary key on person cars, person ID car ID, and this person ID car ID. The primary key requires an index that usually database creates by themselves. So an index on only person ID is not required in this case, because we have already the index on person ID car ID, so it's not useful. Anyway, this is the data definition language. At the end, Entity Framework creates migration history, and it runs the count query. JetEntityFrameworkProvider, we can implement with the JetEntityFramework. With Entity Framework, we can implement several models. For example, using inheritance, TPT or TPH with discrimination, table per type or table per hierarchy with discriminator. Also complex types, also two tables to map a single entity, one-to-one or one-to-zero relationship, or 0-1 relationship, and so on. Most of these models, probably all of these models, are supported by JetEntityFrameworkProvider. JetEntityFrameworkProvider doesn't support timestamps, so concurrency based on timestamps does not work. So we have to choose a different way to implement concurrency. For example, marking concurrency check several fields. But this is the only thing that is not supported, I think. With Entity Framework, we can also write very complex queries. Also, in this case, JetEntityFrameworkProvider can run most of them, but in this case there is some limitation. For example, JetEntityFrameworkProvider cannot support cross joins. because Microsoft Jet doesn't support cross joins, so there is no way to implement it on the provider. Fortunately, cross joins is not used very often. Thanks for seeing.